Hello, everybody. This is Catholic Dad, episode number 326. White male patriarchy and feminism and gratitude. Been doing some thinking about this because there's a movement in the world that essentially says that the males are the problem, that the females have been downtrodden and held slave by man and dominated by man for eons and generations and centuries, and that it was the courageous female that rose up against all odds and has the essentially the hero message that they rose up against all odds, rose together, banded together, and have overcome their oppression. And they've instituted all these this progress for womankind, and man had nothing to do with it. They pushed him out of the way and then have conquered the hill essentially, and that man has been the problem traditionally speaking, and it's the hero woman that's actually going to make the future of the world. These people have no gratitude, and so I wanted to put this in perspective. First, there's a author out there, Angus Deaton, that wrote The Great Escape, and essentially he talks about escaping the agrarian society and going towards industrialization. But he makes the claim that 100 and some odd years ago that there wasn't enough food in the world to feed everybody. Like apparently 20% of the people in the streets of London were so starved that all they could do was lay around. They actually didn't have the actual energy to go up and do some labor, and that those were your impoverished and your paupers. Those are the people that were wiped out by pestilence and plague and so on and so forth. That the world has been chronically malnourished and starved up until last century essentially. And so I was doing something fun, and I was looking at infant mortality rates for the last couple hundred years, and it was something like 50 to 80 infants that were born out of 1,000 would die 100 years ago. That's a lot. We're down to like 5 in America. So the infant mortality rate was essentially 10 times what it is today. And we have we have the highest infant mortality rate in the industrialized world out of all 27 industrialized nations. Well, so what does this mean? This essentially means that there wasn't enough food to have children survive well 100 years ago, right? A little bit over 100 years ago. And essentially, and we didn't have things like formula, we didn't have, baby foods, we didn't have, the milk was probably tainted, we didn't have a good pasteurization process, refrigerators weren't universal, and essentially, if you were using animal milk to feed your kids, they could die of like some kind of dysentery or bacteria or listeria or pasteurella, you name it. And so for infants to survive, women had to be on the infant constantly, meaning she had to constantly, like her entire life was about getting enough nutrition in that infant, never mind herself for that matter. Like she had to be married to the infant for its entire infancy until it could finally walk around and consume food on its own. And, what was the man doing at that point in time? Was he like going, oh, I'm reigning over you and I'm oppressing you, and like I don't want you to rise up and find your own equality. I'm man and I'm dictator. That's the feminist notion. But the fact of the matter is, man worked 7 hard days a week back then. Like religion had to force men to take a day off because they were always procuring enough resources so the kids could just survive. And even then, a lot of the time they didn't survive. And that was literally just 100 years ago in America. And anyway, so women were tied to the infant because of just basic necessity of childhood survival. That's the way it was. And they had to do all the laboring because we didn't have the technology to actually feed children without a mother. We didn't, like, her breast milk was safe. It was a safe supply of good nutrition. It was good for their immune system. It was good for their brains. But there was really nothing else that was reliable that could feed an infant where it wouldn't die. That's why they had wet nurses back then. If it was so easy to come up with easy calories for a baby back then, you wouldn't even have had wet nurses. You would have had bottles in like cow's milk. But the milk supply wasn't safe for babies. So all that being said is this: if womankind looks at the history as the male patriarchy, and that they're the oppressed class and men are the oppressors, it's us versus them, I think they ignore what our grandparents did. And I think anybody who's of like my age or older can look at their grandparents and realize that they actually loved each other and they were actually working together to forge a future together. And so if you look at that history where man went out and like killed himself working so the woman could actually make sure that kids survived, really that is the paradigm, and that they were a team in this process. you have no gratitude for where you came from. You have no gratitude for your grandparents, your great parents, grandparents, your ancestry, and that really the hubris and the audacity that you display by essentially saying, finally, we're coming in line with where we should have been back then, but it was only through our own fortitude and our own courage that we overcame this oppressive system. It has nothing to do with it. And this whole gratitude, you forget your history. You forget how hard life used to be. Life used to be a lot more difficult than it is today. We have it very, very easy in terms of survival. And so, anyway, the mad feminists out there, the harpy women, you name it, even the weak guys that are always marching with their ladies, which they do that, by the way. If you're sitting there saying that man's the problem and woman's going to overcome this thing, just read about history a little bit. Read the book The Great Escape by Angus Deaton. Read about how hard life actually was. It was actually a great travesty. It was difficult. And man and woman had to form a great team. It was called family. That's how we are here today. And so please have some gratitude for your relatives and your ancestors instead of like constantly looking how you're a victim class. Now, all that being said is that's just the patriarchy paradigm, but there's a whole bunch of other paradigms out there in terms of oppressed groups, and you guys do the exact same things too. Like you're great oppressors and you were the great victim class of people, and St. Augustine, let's talk about slavery for a second. St. Augustine said, it's because of the fallen nature of man that slavery and politics will always be necessary. Well, the great St. Augustine could not foresee the future without slavery. Why? Because there were all these labor problems and people would have starved and died. It's like we can't read history with a prospectoscope. We can't be sitting here looking back 2,000 years when Augustine was and saying all those horrible people that were slaves. Maybe you could, I don't know, but I have a hard time believing that everybody was an idiot back then. But and St. Augustine for sure probably was not. I mean, he was a great man. And he thought slavery was a necessary proponent of society back then. Well, anyway, this is Catholic Dad making you think about it. Please like or subscribe, get the Mass, and pray the daily rosary. And do, by the way, have gratitude in your life for the position that you're in, that you're alive, you have your health, you have a house, you have food, you have a car. Be gracious and have gratitude for the people that came before you that made you have the possibilities of what you have. So God bless you all. Take care. Have a good night.